The quietest person in the room is sometimes the one carrying the answer everyone else has been searching for. Cold rain pounded against the glass walls of HarborLink Technologies as fierce winds swept across Boston Harbor, forcing cargo ships to delay their arrivals while lightning briefly illuminated the skyline. Inside the company's massive operations center, rows of glowing monitors displayed thousands of moving shipments crossing highways, railroads, airports, and ports throughout the United States. The building never truly slept. Every minute mattered because millions of dollars depended upon every shipment arriving exactly where it belonged. At precisely 10 o'clock that evening, Ethan Carter quietly walked through the employee entrance wearing a Navy maintenance jacket, carrying a small lunch cooler and an old backpack that had seen far better days. He greeted the overnight security guard with the same warm smile he offered every evening before hanging his jacket inside a small locker and beginning another 12-hour shift. To nearly everyone working inside the building, Ethan was simply the dependable night operations technician who rarely spoke unless someone genuinely needed help. Nobody knew that years earlier he had helped design software systems remarkably similar to the one now controlling nearly every shipment moving across the company's nationwide network. Nobody knew because Ethan had never volunteered the information. After losing his wife 6 years earlier, impressive titles had quietly disappeared from his list of priorities. Being home every afternoon before his 10-year-old son returned from school had become the only promotion he truly wanted. Across the building, Claire Bennett remained inside the executive conference room reviewing presentation materials for an important investor meeting scheduled the following morning. The company planned to announce its largest expansion in history, connecting thousands of additional delivery routes before the holiday season. Every chart, every forecast, and every projection depended upon the stability of the operations platform humming steadily several floors below. Claire glanced through the rain toward the city lights before thanking the remaining executives and encouraging them to go home before the storm became worse. She intended to stay another hour. Meanwhile, Ethan settled into the overnight control room where only a handful of employees monitored dozens of screens glowing softly beneath dim ceiling lights. The steady rhythm of keyboard clicks blended with the distant sound of rain striking the windows. Ethan poured coffee into a plain ceramic mug decorated with a child's colorful drawing that read, "Best Dad Ever." One coworker smiled as he noticed it. "Your son made another masterpiece?" Ethan chuckled quietly. "He says every engineer needs better artwork." They laughed together before returning to work. Ethan opened several routine diagnostic reports, calmly reviewing performance logs that few people ever bothered to read during quiet shifts. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. One processing cluster showed tiny timing irregularities that were easy to dismiss individually but unusual when viewed together. He leaned slightly closer to the monitor, studying the numbers without saying anything. The fluctuations were still well within acceptable limits, yet something about their pattern felt strangely familiar. Outside, another flash of lightning briefly filled the room with white light before darkness returned. Ethan opened an additional system dashboard and compared several network paths side by side. The pattern repeated itself again. Small delays. Tiny synchronization errors. Nothing dramatic. Not yet. Around him the control room remained relaxed, unaware that invisible cracks had quietly begun spreading beneath the foundation of the company's entire logistics network. Ethan rested his hand on the mouse, thoughtfully watching another warning disappear before anyone else noticed it had ever appeared. He did not rush toward the executive floor. He did not announce a crisis. He simply continued gathering information with calm patience because experience had taught him that solving the right problem always began by understanding it completely. Several floors above, Claire finished organizing her notes just as one of the massive display screens flickered for a fraction of a second before returning to normal. She barely noticed it. Ethan did, and as another silent warning appeared deep inside the system logs, he looked toward the storm beyond the glass and quietly realized that before sunrise, everyone inside the building might be searching for an answer that only one forgotten night employee still remembered how to find. Morning arrived with clear skies that gave no hint of the violent storm still pounding Boston only a few hours earlier. By 6:30, Ethan Carter quietly parked his aging pickup truck outside a small brick townhouse before the neighborhood had fully awakened. The porch light switched on almost immediately, and 10-year-old Liam opened the front door wearing a backpack nearly as large as he was. "You made it," Liam said with a smile that erased every trace of exhaustion from Ethan's face. "I promised I would," Ethan replied warmly as they stepped inside. The smell of fresh pancakes drifted through the kitchen where Ethan quickly prepared breakfast while Liam reviewed spelling words at the table. They talked about homework, a science project involving model bridges, and Saturday's baseball practice. There was nothing extraordinary about the conversation, yet Ethan treasured every ordinary moment because those quiet mornings were the reason he had chosen a different life years before. After breakfast they walked together beneath crisp autumn sunshine toward the neighborhood elementary school. Liam looked up as they reached the crossing guard. "Dad, are you coming to career day next month?" Ethan smiled. "Would you like me to?" Liam nodded enthusiastically. "You always explain complicated things so everyone understands them." Ethan laughed softly. "I will be there." Watching his son disappear safely through the school entrance reminded him that every difficult decision had been worth making. Instead of driving home to sleep immediately, Ethan stopped by a small grocery store, picked up fresh fruit, milk, and sandwich bread, then returned to his modest house where he carefully folded laundry before finally resting for a few hours. His life followed the same dependable rhythm. Every day. Sleep. Pick up Liam after school. Help with homework. Cook dinner together. Read before bedtime. Then return to HarborLink Technologies for another overnight shift. Across the city, Claire Bennett arrived early at headquarters carrying a cup of black coffee as employees hurried through the lobby preparing for the investor presentation. The company buzzed with confidence, yet Claire noticed several overnight system reports marked for additional review. Nothing appeared critical, but one maintenance note caught her attention. It had been submitted quietly by Ethan Carter just before the end of his shift. The report described subtle synchronization irregularities developing across multiple processing clusters and recommended closer monitoring before increasing system demand. Claire appreciated concise reports, especially those supported by detailed evidence rather than speculation. "Who wrote this?" she asked her chief operations manager. "One of the overnight technicians," he answered casually. "Reliable fellow. Probably just being extra careful." Claire nodded without comment, placing the report beside her meeting agenda instead of discarding it. Something about its careful wording suggested experience rather than unnecessary caution. That evening, Ethan returned for another shift carrying the same lunch cooler and the same handmade coffee mug Liam had painted for Father's Day. His co-workers joked about the long investor meeting happening upstairs while he quietly reopened the system dashboards he had monitored the previous night. The tiny irregularities had not disappeared. They had multiplied. Processing queues that should have remained perfectly synchronized were now drifting farther apart with every passing hour. The differences were still almost invisible to anyone scanning the primary displays, but Ethan knew that complex systems rarely failed without first whispering warnings to those patient enough to listen. He documented another report, attaching additional performance graphs and carefully outlining a possible chain reaction if the hidden delays continued growing unchecked. He never used dramatic language. He never predicted disaster. He simply trusted the evidence. As midnight approached, the operations center remained calm, glowing beneath rows of quiet monitors while rain once again began tapping gently against the windows. Several floors above, executives celebrated another successful day, unaware that the invisible pattern Ethan had recognized was continuing to spread beneath the surface, patiently waiting for the moment when every overlooked warning would finally become impossible for anyone to ignore. Just after 1:30 in the morning, the calm rhythm inside HarborLink Technologies disappeared without warning. One monitor flashed yellow. Then another. Within seconds an entire wall of digital maps filled with blinking alerts as shipment routes across several states suddenly stopped updating. The steady sound of keyboards was replaced by hurried voices while automated notifications echoed through the operation center. Overnight supervisors rushed from one workstation to another searching for answers that refused to appear. Ethan Carter remained seated, his eyes fixed upon the same diagnostic window he had quietly monitored for 2 nights. The tiny synchronization delays he had documented had finally reached the tipping point he feared. One processing cluster stalled for less than 3 seconds before triggering a chain reaction that spread throughout the routing network. The primary dashboards displayed only the visible symptoms, but Ethan already understood the hidden cause. Upstairs, emergency phone calls interrupted Claire Bennett only moments after she had returned home. She immediately turned her car around and drove back through nearly empty streets as operations managers informed her that shipment scheduling across multiple distribution hubs had frozen simultaneously. External consultants were contacted, senior engineers joined emergency conference calls from home, and every available specialist began searching through millions of lines of diagnostic information. Yet every proposed solution addressed the visible failures instead of the invisible pattern creating them. By the time Claire entered the operations center, the atmosphere had become tense but disciplined. Nobody panicked. Everyone worked. She quickly reviewed the largest display before asking for an update. Senior engineers explained their theories, recommending partial system restarts, emergency routing adjustments, and temporary shutdowns of several processing clusters. Claire listened carefully but noticed uncertainty behind every recommendation. As conversations continued, Ethan quietly compared fresh performance logs against the notes he had written during previous shifts. The timing intervals matched almost perfectly. He opened another window, tracing the cascading delays backward until the first microscopic synchronization error appeared exactly where he expected. His coworker Daniel noticed the focused expression on Ethan's face. "Do you see something?" Ethan answered honestly. "Maybe." Daniel leaned closer. "You should tell somebody." Ethan nodded but continued verifying every assumption first. Experience had taught him that confidence without evidence solved nothing. Across the room, another engineer announced that a full network reset might be necessary. Several managers exchanged worried glances. A restart during peak overnight processing could delay thousands of shipments scheduled to leave before dawn. Claire remained remarkably calm despite the growing pressure. "Do not guess," she said firmly yet respectfully. "Show me what you know." The room fell quiet again as everyone returned to searching for answers. Ethan printed several performance graphs, carefully highlighting the same subtle timing drift he had reported twice before. He reviewed every calculation one final time, making certain nothing rested upon assumption alone. Only then did he stand. He walked toward the operations supervisor without urgency, holding the papers neatly in one hand. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I think the synchronization queue may be failing because the backup scheduler is correcting the same timestamp twice." The supervisor looked surprised. "How certain are you?" Ethan answered with quiet honesty. "Certain enough that I would like permission to test one isolated process before anyone restarts the entire network." Several nearby engineers paused to listen. Claire turned toward the calm overnight technician she barely knew by name, recognizing him immediately as the employee whose careful reports she had read only hours earlier. She studied the evidence in his hands instead of the title on his identification badge. For a long moment the entire operations center waited in complete silence, and Claire realized that the most valuable voice in the room might belong to the one person who had never once tried to make himself the center of attention. Claire accepted the papers without saying a word. She studied the highlighted graphs while Ethan waited patiently, making no attempt to persuade anyone beyond the evidence resting before them. The operations center remained unusually quiet as managers exchanged uncertain glances. One senior engineer finally spoke. "If we isolate the scheduler and he is wrong, we lose another 20 minutes. Ethan answered calmly. If we restart the entire network before isolating the scheduler, the same timing conflict will return the moment synchronization begins again. No arrogance colored his voice. He simply explained the logic one careful step at a time. Claire looked from the graphs to the live system dashboard where another series of warning indicators appeared across the Eastern distribution network. She made her decision without hesitation. Authorize the isolated test, she said. Every action will be documented. No full restart unless this fails. Several engineers immediately prepared a protected testing environment while Ethan quietly moved to an unused workstation. He rolled up the sleeves of his Navy maintenance jacket, opened a diagnostic console, and began typing with steady confidence. There was nothing dramatic about his movements. He paused frequently, rereading commands before pressing each key, carefully verifying every parameter instead of rushing to impress anyone watching. Claire noticed that even under pressure he never raised his voice or blamed another department. His attention remained fixed entirely upon solving the problem. Minutes passed as everyone watched the testing environment. Ethan redirected one synchronization process away from the duplicated timestamp. Correction, temporarily disabling a secondary validation sequence that had unknowingly begun repeating during the storm-related network fluctuations. He then restarted only the isolated process instead of the entire routing platform. For several long seconds nothing happened. Then one monitor changed from yellow to green. Another cluster followed. Moments later additional routing queues began clearing themselves automatically as delayed shipment records synchronized without creating new conflicts. One engineer leaned toward his screen in disbelief. The processing backlog is shrinking. Another called across the room. Distribution Hub 7 is reporting normal response times again. More green indicators gradually replaced the flashing warnings that had covered the operations wall only minutes earlier. Claire watched shipment routes begin moving across the digital map exactly as they had before the failure. The room remained almost silent, not because nobody had anything to say, but because everyone needed a moment to understand what they were seeing. Ethan continued monitoring the recovery instead of celebrating. Please wait another 5 minutes, he said quietly. The delayed queues still need to stabilize before we declare success. Claire appreciated the caution. Experience had taught her that real professionals respected results more than applause. Exactly 5 minutes later every primary processing cluster returned to normal operation. Automated reports confirmed that shipment scheduling had recovered without requiring a full network restart. Overnight deliveries resumed on schedule, preserving millions of dollars in time-sensitive logistics. Relief spread across the room as exhausted employees smiled for the first time all night. A few people began applauding almost instinctively. Ethan looked up with modest surprise before offering a small smile and returning to close the final diagnostic window. He picked up his coffee mug, now completely cold, and quietly resumed documenting every step he had taken so the permanent engineering team could review it later. Claire walked slowly toward him, stopping beside the workstation where he calmly completed his report. Mr. Carter, she said with genuine respect, how did you recognize a failure that so many experienced specialists missed? Ethan saved the final document before meeting her eyes. Because I stopped looking at what the system was doing, he answered softly. I started looking at why it had quietly changed 2 nights ago. Claire stood there for a moment, realizing that the man wearing a simple night technician badge possessed not only remarkable technical skill, but the rare discipline to notice small truths long before they became impossible for everyone else to ignore. Morning sunlight slowly replaced the storm clouds as HarborLink Technologies returned to its normal rhythm, yet conversations throughout the headquarters centered on the quiet overnight technician who had prevented a costly system failure without seeking recognition. Ethan Carter finished his incident report with the same careful attention he gave every assignment before placing it on his supervisor's desk. He thanked the departing overnight team, collected his lunch cooler and backpack, and quietly headed toward the parking garage. There were no interviews, no celebration, and no attempt to enjoy unexpected attention. By 8 o'clock he was already driving across town because someone far more important than any executive meeting would soon be waiting outside an elementary school. Upstairs, Claire Bennett remained inside the executive conference room reviewing the detailed recovery logs. Every command Ethan had entered was documented with remarkable precision, every decision supported by evidence rather than assumption. She turned to her chief technology officer. "How long has Mr. Carter worked nights?" The executive opened the personnel database. "Almost 5 years." Claire looked surprised. 5 years? He nodded. "Dependable employee. Excellent evaluations. Never asks for promotions." Claire studied the employment file more closely. Several sections immediately caught her attention. Before joining HarborLink, Ethan had worked as a senior systems architect for one of the country's leading logistics software companies. His published research on distributed synchronization had once been referenced by multiple engineering journals. He had led teams, designed enterprise platforms, and received offers from several Fortune 500 companies. Then, almost without explanation, his professional record changed completely. Leadership positions disappeared. Consulting contracts ended. Night operations technician. Claire quietly leaned back in her chair, unable to reconcile the extraordinary career before her with the humble man carrying a child's painted coffee mug through the employee entrance every evening. "What happened?" she asked softly. The human resources director searched several archived notes before answering. His wife passed away unexpectedly 6 years ago. Shortly afterward he declined 2 executive positions and requested work with predictable overnight hours. According to his interview, he wanted every afternoon free to raise his son himself. Silence settled across the room. Claire closed the file without saying anything further. The greatest qualification she had discovered that morning was not listed beside any degree or professional certification. It was a father's quiet decision to place his child above every ambition he had once pursued. Across town, Ethan arrived exactly on time outside Liam's school just as students poured through the front doors laughing beneath bright autumn sunshine. Liam spotted the familiar pickup truck and ran toward it carrying a cardboard bridge from his science class. "Dad, it held 15 pounds before it finally bent." Ethan smiled proudly. "That sounds like excellent engineering." Liam climbed into the passenger seat. "How was work?" Ethan started the truck before answering with complete simplicity. "Busy, but everything worked out." They stopped for sandwiches at a neighborhood deli before spending the afternoon building a stronger version of Liam's bridge across the kitchen table using popsicle sticks, wood glue, and patient conversation. Ethan never mentioned that hundreds of employees had applauded him only hours earlier because to him the loudest success of the day was hearing his son laugh while trying another design. Later that evening, Claire found herself reading Ethan's employment file one final time before quietly placing it back inside the cabinet. She looked through the office window toward the city skyline and realized that she had spent years searching for exceptional leaders by studying impressive resumes and polished presentations. Yet the person who had demonstrated the clearest judgment, deepest humility, and strongest character had been quietly working through the night while asking for nothing more than enough flexibility to be home before school ended. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Claire understood that true greatness often arrives without introducing itself, choosing instead to reveal its worth only when everyone else has run out of answers. Several days passed before Claire Bennett finally acted upon the questions that had quietly followed her since the night of the system failure. She did not summon Ethan Carter to the executive office or arrange another formal meeting. Instead, she chose something much simpler. Late one Thursday afternoon, after finishing a series of board meetings, she drove through a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston carrying a small paper bag from a local bakery. The address she had received from Human Resources was used only after carefully asking permission through Ethan's supervisor, making certain her visit would not feel intrusive. As she stepped onto the front walkway, she immediately heard laughter coming from the backyard. Ethan and Liam were kneeling beside 2 bicycles turned upside down on the grass, carefully adjusting a loose bicycle chain while a golden retriever watched with cheerful curiosity. Neither of them noticed Claire until Liam looked toward the driveway and waved enthusiastically. "Dad, somebody is here." Ethan stood, wiped his hands with a clean shop towel, and smiled with genuine surprise. "Ms. Bennet." Claire returned the smile. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important." Ethan glanced at the bicycles before laughing softly. "Only an emergency repair shop." Liam proudly held up a wrench. "Mine came off first, but now we are fixing Dad's too." Claire admired the easy conversation between father and son. There was no hurry, no expensive distractions, only patience, encouragement, and the quiet confidence that every problem could be solved together. Ethan invited her onto the back porch where fresh lemonade rested beside a small tray of homemade oatmeal cookies. Liam politely offered her one before returning to tighten another bolt under his father's guidance. Claire accepted the cookie with appreciation. "I have attended dinners that cost thousands of dollars," she said gently, "but I do not remember the last time I saw people enjoy such an ordinary afternoon." Ethan looked toward Liam with peaceful contentment. "These are the moments I could not miss." Claire understood exactly what he meant. She watched Ethan explain bicycle mechanics with the same calm clarity he had used while restoring the company's network. He never solved the problem for Liam. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions until the boy discovered each answer himself. "Try turning it one more notch," Ethan encouraged. Liam smiled as the wheel spun smoothly. "It worked." Ethan nodded proudly. "You figured it out." Claire quietly realized that Ethan led people the same way whether they were engineers or children. He never sought attention. He simply helped others become stronger. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the yard, Liam excused himself to ride around the neighborhood with friends. Claire remained seated on the porch beside Ethan, listening to birds singing in the nearby trees. "I finally understand why you chose this life," she said softly. Ethan looked toward the quiet street before answering. "After my wife passed away, everyone encouraged me to chase another promotion because they thought staying busy would make the grief easier. But Liam did not need another executive. He needed his father." Claire lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "Most people spend their careers trying to prove how valuable they are." Ethan smiled. "The people waiting at home already know." Neither of them spoke for several peaceful moments. The silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. As Claire prepared to leave, she realized she had not discovered a man who sacrificed ambition because he lacked ability. She had discovered someone who willingly redefined success, choosing presence over prestige and family over recognition. Driving away beneath the golden evening sky, Claire understood that the company had not simply overlooked an extraordinary engineer for 5 years. It had quietly overlooked one of the finest leaders she had ever met. Autumn gradually gave way to early winter, and HarborLink Technologies settled into a new rhythm shaped by quiet improvements rather than dramatic announcements. Many of the system safeguards Ethan Carter had recommended after the overnight failure had already been implemented, making the entire logistics network stronger without disrupting daily operations. Most employees never knew who had designed the changes. Ethan never placed his name on any proposal. He simply reviewed the final documentation, answered questions whenever someone asked, and returned to his overnight workstation with the same quiet humility that had always guided him. Claire Bennet noticed something else changing as well. Departments that rarely worked together had begun communicating more openly because Ethan's detailed reports encouraged people to solve problems instead of assigning blame. The culture inside the company slowly became calmer, more respectful, and more collaborative. One afternoon Claire invited Ethan to join a small leadership discussion, not because she wanted him to speak the most, but because she trusted the way he listened. Ethan accepted only after confirming that the meeting would end early enough for him to pick Liam up from school. During the discussion, several managers debated an upcoming technology upgrade. Opinions moved back and forth without reaching a clear direction until Claire quietly turned toward Ethan. "What do you think?" she asked. Ethan paused before answering. "Every system eventually reflects the habits of the people building it. If we only invest in software, we will solve today's problem. If we also invest in helping people understand one another, we will solve tomorrow's problems before they happen." The conference room became unexpectedly quiet. No one challenged the thought because everyone had watched him prove the same principle through action. After the meeting ended, one senior manager smiled as Ethan gathered his notebook. "You never seem interested in proving that you are the smartest person in the room." Ethan laughed softly. "That is because the smartest room is the one where everyone leaves knowing a little more than when they arrived." Claire watched him leave with quiet admiration. His wisdom never sounded rehearsed. It simply reflected the way he lived. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived outside Liam's school just before the dismissal bell. Children rushed toward waiting parents carrying backpacks, artwork, and winter jackets. Liam climbed into the pickup truck holding a permission slip for the upcoming school science fair. "Dad," he asked excitedly, "would you help me build a weather station?" Ethan smiled. "I would not miss it." That evening the dining table became a workshop filled with rulers, cardboard, wires, notebooks, and warm bowls of homemade chili. They measured, experimented, laughed at mistakes, and celebrated every small success together. Across town, Claire found herself thinking less about quarterly reports and more about the simple afternoon she had witnessed at Ethan's home. She realized that leadership was not measured only inside boardrooms. It appeared in kitchens, backyards, classrooms, and every place where someone patiently helped another person become more confident. The next morning she walked through the operations center before sunrise and noticed Ethan finishing another detailed maintenance report. He looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning." Claire returned the smile. "Good morning, Ethan." She looked around the quiet room before speaking again. "You know, I used to believe companies were built by extraordinary strategies." Ethan closed the report and gently placed it on the desk. "And now?" Claire smiled thoughtfully. "Now I think they are built by ordinary people who choose to care every single day." Ethan nodded once, not because he wished to receive the compliment, but because he quietly believed she had discovered a truth far more valuable than anything written on a business plan. As the first light of dawn spread across the Boston skyline beyond the glass walls, both of them understood that genuine success rarely arrives through one remarkable achievement. More often, it is patiently built through countless small decisions made with integrity, humility, and the quiet determination to leave every person and every place a little better than they were the day before. Winter settled gently over Boston as holiday lights appeared along quiet streets and the final weeks of the year brought a calmer pace to HarborLink Technologies. The company had successfully completed its largest software upgrade in years, and for the first time in months, the operations center felt peaceful rather than urgent. Ethan Carter continued arriving every evening with the same worn backpack, the same homemade lunch, and the same coffee mug Liam had painted years before. Although many employees now recognized the quiet technician whose insight had protected the company's entire logistics network, Ethan treated every shift exactly as he always had. He greeted the security guards by name, helped new employees understand unfamiliar procedures, and quietly fixed small problems before anyone else realized they existed. One snowy afternoon, Claire Bennett asked Ethan if he could stop by her office before leaving to pick up Liam from school. Ethan glanced at the clock and smiled politely. "I have about 20 minutes." Claire appreciated the answer because it reflected the same priority he had never hidden. When Ethan entered the executive office overlooking Boston Harbor, she invited him to sit beside the window where snowflakes drifted across the skyline. A single folder rested neatly on her desk. "I have been thinking about our conversations," Claire began. "And I believe HarborLink needs a different kind of leader." Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. Claire gently slid the folder across the desk. Inside was an offer for the position of Chief Technology Officer, complete with generous compensation, expanded authority, and responsibility for guiding the company's future innovation. Ethan read every page carefully before closing the folder with the same calm expression he wore during ordinary maintenance reports. "It is an incredible opportunity," he said sincerely. "Thank you." Claire smiled. "I was hoping you would say yes." Ethan looked toward the snow-covered harbor before answering. "There is only one problem." Claire waited patiently. "The position requires executive hours," Ethan explained. "Morning meetings. Evening events. Weekend travel. Liam gets out of school at 3 o'clock every afternoon. I promised myself that no title would ever keep me from being there when he walks through those school doors." Claire lowered her eyes thoughtfully. She had expected questions about salary, authority, or staffing. She had not expected a father protecting an ordinary afternoon with his son. For several quiet moments neither of them spoke. Finally Claire leaned forward with a gentle smile. "What if the position changed instead of asking you to change?" Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity. Claire continued. "What if your leadership schedule began after school drop-off and ended before school dismissal? Most meetings can be moved. Technology can connect us from anywhere. Results matter more than office hours." Ethan remained silent, surprised by the sincerity behind her proposal. Claire folded her hands together. "The company nearly lost millions because we overlooked someone who understood what truly mattered. I do not want us to repeat that mistake. I want HarborLink to become the kind of place where great parents never have to choose between meaningful work and the people waiting at home." Ethan smiled for the first time since entering the office, not because of the promotion itself, but because someone finally understood the promise he had carried every day since losing his wife. "If I can still be the father waiting outside Liam's school every afternoon," he said softly, "then I would be honored to help build the future of this company." Claire extended her hand across the desk. Ethan shook it warmly, and the agreement felt less like a business contract than a shared commitment to something larger than either of them. As Ethan stepped outside into the gently falling snow, he looked at the time and smiled. There was still plenty of time to reach the school before the final bell, and he quietly realized that the greatest opportunities are not the ones that ask us to sacrifice what matters most, but the ones that honor the life we have worked so hard to protect. 1 year later, the first warm afternoon of spring filled Boston with bright sunshine, blooming trees, and a gentle breeze drifting across the harbor. HarborLink Technologies had become a different company from the one Ethan Carter first entered through the overnight employee entrance carrying an old backpack and a homemade lunch. The operations center now reflected the same quiet principles Ethan had always practiced. Teams shared knowledge freely, departments worked together instead of competing, and every new engineer learned that solving problems began with careful observation long before quick conclusions. Ethan never asked anyone to follow his example. He simply lived it every day. His office overlooked the same harbor where countless cargo ships arrived and departed, yet the room itself remained surprisingly simple. A framed photograph of Liam stood beside his computer, along with a familiar coffee mug that still read, "Best Dad Ever." Every afternoon, just before 3 o'clock, Ethan quietly closed his laptop, wished everyone a good afternoon, and drove to Liam's school without fail. Nobody questioned the schedule because the company had learned that honoring family strengthened leadership rather than weakening it. Claire Bennett watched those quiet routines with genuine admiration. She often smiled as she saw Ethan leave on time, knowing every important meeting had already been completed because he planned each day with remarkable discipline. One Friday afternoon HarborLink hosted an open house celebrating the company's strongest year in its history. Employees brought spouses, children, and parents to tour the operations center while engineers demonstrated the technology that kept millions of deliveries moving across the country. Liam proudly walked beside his father wearing a visitor badge almost as carefully as Ethan wore his own employee identification. He eagerly explained to anyone willing to listen that his father helped people solve problems before they became emergencies. Claire laughed softly when she overheard him. "That sounds exactly right," she said. Later that afternoon the company gathered on the rooftop terrace overlooking Boston Harbor as the sun slowly settled toward the horizon. The celebration was simple, filled with families sharing food, children playing together, and coworkers enjoying conversations without rushing toward the next meeting. Claire stepped beside Ethan near the terrace railing while Liam joined several children flying colorful kites across the open lawn nearby. "Do you ever miss your old career?" Claire asked gently. Ethan watched Liam laughing beneath the spring sky before answering. "I never left it." Claire looked at him with quiet curiosity. Ethan smiled. "I still solve difficult problems every day. The difference is that now I never have to miss the moments that matter most." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "You changed more than our technology." Ethan shook his head gently. "People changed it together. I only reminded everyone to slow down long enough to notice one another." For a few peaceful moments they simply watched the children running across the grass while sailboats drifted quietly through the harbor below. Claire realized that the greatest lesson Ethan had ever taught the company had nothing to do with software architecture or logistics systems. It was the understanding that extraordinary leadership begins with ordinary faithfulness, quiet humility, and the courage to keep promises made to the people waiting at home. As golden sunlight reflected across the water, Liam ran toward them holding a brightly colored kite high above his head. "Dad, come help me catch the wind." Ethan smiled immediately. "I am coming." Without hesitation he walked toward his son, leaving the city skyline behind for something infinitely more valuable. Claire watched them together with peaceful gratitude, understanding that the brightest minds do not always chase the highest titles or the loudest applause. Sometimes they quietly build stronger families, stronger workplaces, and stronger communities simply by choosing kindness, integrity, and love every ordinary day. And in the end, the most remarkable legacy any person can leave behind is not found in the position they hold, but in the lives they gently lived along the way.